I want to look at a role-play situation for disaster recovery using Arcserve UDP and IBM Bluemix. The situation is that my on-premise infrastructure has been lost, and all I have to recover it is my off-site recovery point server hosted in IBM Bluemix. It's a shared virtual machine costing just a few $100s a month, but it's a really low-cost DR solution. The RPS in Bluemix contains a replica of all the backups that were taken prior to losing my on-premise infrastructure. To complete the recovery process, I'm going to use Bluemix's ability to deploy a bare metal host with either VMware or HyperV, and I'm going to leverage that hypervisor as my recovery platform. I'm going to start by deploying my bare metal host inside of Bluemix. I'm just going to choose an hourly server, and I'm going to choose the smallest and cheapest available for the purposes of this role play. I need to choose my data center, and I'm going to use Sydney, which is where my backup server, recovery point server, is located. Choose my CPU and my amount of RAM, and in my operating system I could obviously choose HyperV or Windows 2012 or 2016 or VMware, and I'm just going to go with Windows 2012 R2, and then I'll enable the HyperV role later. I'm not going to make any configuration changes to the host other than to specify that I want to have a gigabit network port. That's all. I'll submit that order, and then I just need to wait for a couple of hours for the bare metal host to become available. Okay, so a few hours have gone by and my bare metal host is ready to go. I'm just going to jump onto it, and I'm going to install the HyperV role, and I'm also going to install the Arcserve agent, and it's ready to go. Okay, so I've got my HyperV server available. I need to jump into the Arcserve UDP console and discover what backup jobs I actually have that I can recover. Easy way to do this is to actually browse the data store to have a look at what the data store contains, all of the server backups that are available. From here I can select one of my server images and select the option to create an instant VM. I'm then presented with all of the versions of the server. So basically every incremental backup that was taken I can choose to recover. I specify my password that was used to encrypt the backup, and now I need to choose my HyperV host. So I could have chosen vSphere, but I'm going to use HyperV in this case. So choose my HyperV host from the drop down, and just acknowledge that the HyperV host will be the recovery server in this instance. I can now choose a location on my HyperV host where I want to store the virtual machine configuration. So if I haven't already created one, I can create a folder, but I'm just going to use a folder already created called Instant VM. I can then choose to add a network adapter. I can choose to preserve the IP address settings from my production server, or I can specify a new IP address to use in the new subnet. In this first example, I'm just using the same IP address. I'm just preserving it, and I'm just going to hit on finish, and then when prompted I'm going to select boot now, because I want the virtual machine to be created. I want it to boot up immediately so it's available very quickly. If I refresh my HyperV console, I can now see this new virtual machine has been created. It's currently still turned off as UDP is going through a few processes before it will actually power on that virtual machine. In the meantime, I'm going to start provisioning the second instant VM. Again, I'm going to browse my data store. I'm going to select the server that I wish to recover. Then I'm going to choose the recovery point that I want to create the instant VM from. You can see here I can browse back through history of all of the incremental backups that have been carried out for that server. Again, I specify my encryption password, and I'm going to specify my hypervisor again using the same HyperV host. I'm going to use the same folder location. Again, acknowledge that the HyperV host will be the recovery server. Choose my folder location, and this time I'm going to specify a new IP address, a new default gateway for this particular VM. So I can add my network card and I type in my IP address that I wish to use. I'll also type in the subnet mask for the appropriate network, and I can specify the default gateway also. Again, I'm going to specify that I want to boot the VM now, and I'll get that started. And we just need to wait for the virtual machine to be available inside of HyperV. Okay, here we are inside HyperV. The instant VM is booted up and it's available, it's running. I can log in, it's fully operational. The bulk of its storage is still stored inside the backup, but anything that is being written by the virtual machine is being written to its own VHD file on the local disk of the HyperV host. Since the virtual machine was powered on, it's been through a bit of a process, an automatic process. It's had the obviously its hardware detected and drivers installed. The HyperV integration services have been updated, and then it's basically a fully operational HyperV host. It was originally a VMware virtual machine, but now it's a HyperV virtual machine. One more thing to show, just to finish off the recovery process. We don't want to be running a virtual machine from the data store for too long, so we want to complete this process by moving the virtual machine. Now, by using the HyperV, the native HyperV storage migration capability, we're actually going to be pulling all of the backup data out of the data store and storing it on the local HyperV's disks. We'll then be able to run the virtual machine at a full speed. The time it takes to complete the move is entirely dependent on the size and the performance of the server.